Welcome to the Cash Confident Podcast. I'm Bree Sedano, your fearless host, personal finance expert, and the visionary behind the revolutionary Cash Confident community. Oh, hello, Bree Sedano here with you today for another episode of Cash Confident Podcast. And today we will be working on part 2 of mindset skills. So last week we went over 5 different skills that you want to know and understand to be able to change your mindset. And today we're going to work on 5 more skills that you're going to want to have to change your mindset. And these skills are about money, but they're really just about mental authority. It's just about, and it could be meant like having control over your mind, but I think control is a really too hard of a word. I talk about that in last week's episode some more. So your mind it's never really going to be like under control. Like your thoughts are going to just do what they do. Your mind is just going to do what it does. But in time you can train your mind to be different, right? You can take down ideas, you can install new ideas, you can break down judgments, you can examine truths, and you can really start to see the world differently. And the more that you do that, the more you're able to create the life that you want. So when our mind is not set up for what we want to have, for who we want to be, when we don't have proper training for that, it's up to us to be able to do that work. So last week's episode was super, super good. We talk about observing the mind, examining truths, breaking or installing belief structures, removing judgments, and changing the directions of thoughts. And today we're going to work on 5 other skills. Now, these things are things that I will be teaching. I have a master class coming up that's going to be called The Astonishing Power of Directional Thought. And that is, it's just a skill that I think is so, so important. It's one of the most important, most fundamental mental skills that anybody could possess. And the more that you have the authority over your mind to shift your focus and redirect your focus back to what you want versus focusing on what you don't want, that's just a really, really big difference in your level of lifestyle creation. So, you can check out the show notes. There'll be links for those things. And then we have an upcoming program called Wired for Wealth, which is going to teach in-depth money mindset. It's really just mindset in general, in-depth mindset techniques on how to change your reality. So those things are coming up. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. All right. So the first thing I want to teach you today is how to shift perception. So when we think about our perception, we're going to be looking at the world through our worldview, right? Like I'm going to be looking at the world as a 5'0" chubby white lady who's almost 40. And, with my education and my background, and I'm from New England, and all of these things are going to be factored in to the way that I see the world, right? It just is. So people's worldviews are obviously impacted by your upbringing, by your social status, by your skin color, your height, your weight, your ability, like everything that you are impacts your perception. Now, what we can do with perceptions is I love to play with perceptions because it's like if you're standing looking at a football field from one direction, you're going to see it. Even if you see it in its entirety, you're going to see it from that direction. But if you were, let's say you were in the stands, but if you were at the ground level is it the touchdown spot? I shouldn't have made a sports metaphor. Sorry, guys. But, if you're at the goalpost, it's the goalpost. You're going to be looking at that same football field, but it's going to be different. And if you are on the other side of the stands, it's going to look different. And if you were in the coach's box, it's going to look different. And if you were in the skybox, it's going to look different. So perception is a thing that I like to play with. And so there's a couple different ways that I like to play with perception. Sometimes I will play with perception around judgment. Sometimes I'll play with perception around limitation. And sometimes I will just play with perception around problem solving. So I'll give you an example of each. So one of the questions that I ask clients sometimes is like, well, if you knew that you couldn't fail, if failing was 100% not even available in this situation, how would you handle it? What would you do? And what we're doing is we're taking our perception on the other side of our fear. So we get to look at we get to look at the same thing, but it's from a different perspective. If we knew that we couldn't fail, if we were guaranteed for success, then we get to the truth of what we want. We let go of some of the conditions for what we think, needs to happen. Another question I'll ask is like, if money was unlimited, how would you deal with this? If there was no financial limitation, I'll ask the same question for time. If you had unlimited time to deal with this, how would you do it? Right. So sometimes we can put our perception on the other side of a limitation, and that helps us to become aware of where our limits are. We can start to see those limitations in our mind. We can start to see where our thoughts are not quite big enough for the reality that we're creating, or when we're just getting in our own way, right? Like when we're getting in our own way, this is when you feel like you're resistant, when you're in your own way, this is a great activity in playing with these different perceptions. With judgment, sometimes I'll ask the question from the other side of a judgment. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, you got to go back and listen to it. So this makes more sense. But so let's just say you have a judgment. We're going to use the same example from last week around like being greedy. So I'll ask, if you were a greedy bad girl, what would you want? When people tell me that they don't know what they want. And a lot of times people don't know what they want because they'd have to be on the wrong side of their judgment to know what they would want. Or if you were a lazy slob, what would you want? Or if you were inconsiderate and only cared about yourself, what would you want? And that helps us to see things from a different perspective. Now, you're not necessarily going to take all those actions, but oftentimes you're going to get some truth that you weren't letting yourself see. You're going to have more information. I'll give you an example. I was doing this activity on my last retreat that we did in Tulum, Mexico, which was lovely. And we were going around the table and everybody was working with this on the other side of their judgments. And so one of the ladies said, well, if I was inconsiderate and only cared about myself, I would do X, Y, and Z. But it was the truth of what she wanted. And it was the idea that she had to be all things to all people and that she needed to martyr herself, in the situation that was preventing that. And so when she said that out loud and we were all like, ooh, because we could see the judgment there. We could see the judgment that was holding her back. And anyways, she decided to quit her job and go full time in her business because of that information, that truth that was available. She didn't have access to that truth before I asked that question. So, so sometimes when we have our judgments, if we can put ourselves on the other side of our judgment and ask the same question, well, what would you want? Or who would you be? Or how would you handle this? If you were greedy, how would you handle this if you were selfish? And again, it's not to say that that's how you should do it. It's just, it brings a more balanced, it just brings, different perspectives, right? So if you were like evaluating this football field and you are only evaluating it, and you're only evaluating it from, the one set, the stands or whatever, and you're not walking around and you don't see the whole picture, your evaluation is going to be less thorough. So shifting perception is a thing that I like to do. And then sometimes I'll play with perception, just like, if I was already the woman I'm becoming, how would I handle this? If I was already, a multi-million-dollar business owner, how would I handle this? If I was already, whatever, 156 pounds, or if I was already the owner of a tiger, just kidding, I don't even want to have a tiger. How would I look at this? How would I handle this? And so shifting your perception, why this is such a valuable skill is, one, it gives you an incredible amount of data to be able to look at when you're problem solving or when you're making decisions. But additionally, it helps so much in your interpersonal skills to be like, you can totally see why somebody does something when you can shift your perception from, it's not always easy to do this in situations where you're involved in it. But if you're like watching your kids or your coworkers have a disagreement, And you're like, oh, I can see why she thinks this and I can see why he thinks that. That ability to shift perception is something that just makes your mind more mobile, more flexible. It helps you to see things in different ways, and it gives you a lot more information. So that's a skill that you're going to want to have. It gives you the ability to, when it's facing outward, it gives you better interpersonal relationship skills, but when you put it inward, it really helps you to see where your limits are, where your judgments are, and anything that's any mental structures that are between you and your goals. All right. So releasing an attachment is the next skill that I want to teach you about today. Now, attachment is a thing that often happens when we really want something. And this is a little bit of an energetic skill. It's this skill kind of really runs between a mental skill and an energetic skill. But every time we want something, chances are we simultaneously don't want something that's the opposite. So for years, I had an attachment around money, right? Because I was afraid of poverty. I was afraid of not having enough. I was afraid of scarcity. So what was happening with my vibe, right? So like I said, this is a mental and an energetic thing, is I was having desire toward money while at the exact same time I was having a powerful fear and aversion toward poverty. And so those two things are happening at the same time. And so my signal to the universe is really muddy. And what that causes is a lot of oscillation and a lot of shifting my focus and a lot of like fear and desire and back and forth, right? So when we're attached to something, generally what's really happening is we have a desire in one direction around something and a fear in the opposite direction, but they're both active in our vibe, right? So I was attached to money because I was afraid of poverty. I wasn't just going after growing my business because I was just going after growing my business because I just wanted it. I was simultaneously afraid of not having enough. So I hope that's clear enough. So when we're having an attachment to something, it really, really mucks up our manifestation because we're muddy when it comes. We're sending mixed signals to the universe. So instead of just wanting what I want, I'm wanting what I want at the same time of not wanting what I don't want. And both of those things are active at the same time. Because every time I think about money, I'm not just getting clear, pure desire. I'm also getting the fear of not enough money, right? And so I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So the thing about attachment is that when we look at that and we can kind of see, all right, well, here's what I want and here's what I don't want, then you can start to mentally work on releasing that by shifting your perception, kind of going back to what we did in the first step. So releasing this attachment is like, so what I like to do, this is what's worked pretty well for me and my clients, is I like to make a list of the downsides of getting everything I want, the downsides of it. Right. And then I like to make a list of the upsides to not getting everything to not getting everything I don't want or to getting everything I don't want. So listen, here's the way that I did this, because I think that's a little like verbally confusing. But so when I looked at like, all right, well, if I want to grow my business, I look at the downsides of that. Well, I'm going to have to pay more in taxes and it's going to be annoying and I'm going to have to train more people and blah, 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 blah. Right. And I like kind of go through and I see all the negative sides, the downsides of me getting what I want. And then I look at the upsides. Well, if I lost everything, then I could get state health insurance and that would be nice. Having good health insurance would be a bonus. And and you start to go through some of these other things. Now, all this does is it shifts your perception and it takes some of the sting out of the fear and it takes some of the I'm going to call it desperation out of the wanting, right? And so when you look at the thing that you want and it becomes more of a preference, more of a thing that you like want because you want it and you're like fully accepting the upsides and the downsides. And when you look at the thing that you're afraid of and you're like, well, actually, it wouldn't kill me. Actually, maybe there's some things to learn there. Actually, I'd be all right. actually, it's not what I want, but it could work out for me. Like one of the things when I was doing this was, so a lot of people who are incredibly wealthy have declared bankruptcy. Like they've lost everything. And when they lost everything, the fear of losing everything goes away because they see that they're just okay. And I was like, honestly, like, shit, man, that'd be all right. Like, and so you can start to see like, all right, well, if this worked out the way that I think I want it, it'd be great. And if this worked out the way that I don't want it, there's probably also some greatness in there for me. It could be a great part of my story. And what this does is it helps to release that attachment. It helps to release the oscillation, the up and down, the back and forth of it. So releasing an attachment is a skill because this gives you so much more energetic clarity. It gives you a lot more ability to control your focus when you're not going towards something while simultaneously not going toward the opposite, right? All right. So that's the second thing that I wanted to teach you today around releasing an attachment. The third thing I want to teach you today is a simple little trick, and it's just how to drop a thought. So this is a great thing when your thoughts are bothering you, when your mind is just being a little bitch, when it's just like bothering you and just talking about things that are just not what you want. So what you're going to do with this is you're going to identify that your mind is bothering you. You're going to identify the thought that you're having that's bothering you or the story that you have that's bothering you. And you're going to pick up a pen or something that you could easily drop, right? And so what you're going to do is you're going to pick up the pen. You're going to look at the pen. You're going to think the thought on purpose, and you're going to just like mentally assign the thought to the pen, right? Like as a representation, as a symbol. And then you're going to think the thought, and then you're going to drop the pen. And you're going to drop the thought when you drop the pen. And before you pick the pen up, you're going to think a different thought on purpose. And it doesn't matter what the other thought is. It could just be like, the sky's blue today. I like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. Like, it doesn't matter. And then you'll think the other thought, and then you'll pick the pen back up, and you'll think the thought that's bothering you, and then you'll drop the pen, and then you'll drop the thought, and then you'll think a different thought, and then you'll pick the pen back up. And you could do this, I would say 5-10 times. It's a really quick activity. You don't need to drop it on the floor. You could drop it on your desk. Doesn't matter. And what this does is it's just you using your authority over your mind to say that we're not thinking this thought anymore. And it's something that if this is new to you, you may have to come back to it a few times, and that's okay. But the ability to drop a thought, the ability to drop something from your mind is just so peaceful, right? And so, yeah, it's a great skill. It's also not valuable for not feeling your feelings or trying to bypass something or not getting to the bottom of something that needs to be solved, but it is a skill that you do want to possess. Your mind's like a dog with a bone. Like it'll just be like gnawing on something, and you're like, this isn't what I want to be focused on right now. So that skill is really helpful. All right. So the next two things that I'm going to teach you are a little bit more advanced. So buckle up. All right. So the fourth thing I'm going to teach you today is around finding a pattern underneath a story. So this may be something that you need to work with a practitioner on. I'll tell you that. So you may want to, if you have something that's happening over and over again, you may want to work with a coach or a therapist or, even a friend. Like sometimes you just need somebody else's perspective to see some of these things. So most of the time when people have patterns around their money, and I'll use money as the example, they can't see them because every time the pattern happens, the story is different. And so I'm gonna just tell a story. So I worked with a client once who had a pattern of major losses, and it started when she was a kid. Her mom was super sick, and she was a little kid and like negotiated with God around her mom not dying. It didn't work. Her mom eventually died, and there was this pattern of like desperation and really like working super hard. And in this case, it was like working super hard in her prayers and like really negotiating and being such a good girl and whatever. And then this major loss of her mom dying. All right. So when we look at that story underneath, there's the the desperation for the wanting, right, of her mom to live. We look at the like negotiating of herself, of being a good girl, and then we look at a major loss. Now, fast forward, I don't know, 30 years or whatever, and this client had had major losses in her business, like over and over again, but the pattern was the same. So the stories were really different. The stories were one situation was like, she had a deal with a partnership. She worked super hard. The company made $1 bazillion, and then the money on the partnership never came through, and they fired her. And this is after she did all that good girl work, right? So she worked super hard. She fulfilled on her end of the bargain, and then there was the loss, right? And so things like this happened over and over and over again. And it was this pattern. So there was this story that was there, that was still painful. There was still a lot of emotion under that. So being able to find the emotions underneath a story is a skill that helps you to understand when you need to get out of your mind and into the energy, into the emotional realm, right? So like this client she didn't have like necessarily a mindset issue. It wasn't really a mindset issue. We're not going to solve these stories with her mind necessarily, but we really need to let go of the charge, the emotion, that stickiness that's underneath the story. And so that was how we worked together to, basically she had to like feel those feelings and let these stories, when I say let the stories go, I mean like let the emotion go out of the stories, process the emotion, so that way the stories are just stories. But she was recreating these patterns over and over again because there was still active emotions underneath them. So if you have patterns of yo-yo debt, or patterns of losing jobs, or patterns of spending all your money, or patterns of bad business deals, or like whatever, this is a skill that you're going to want to start to do, because then you can go back and you can kind of imagine what aspects of your life feel the same as this. Go back, find the patterns, and then it's an episode for a different day, but then you have to move into like more of the emotional realm. It's not a mindset necessarily thing if there's a lot of charge underneath something, but your ability to recognize your own patterns, big deal. It's a big deal. You want that skill. Like you want to be able to recognize your patterns. You even want to be able to recognize patterns in others. It's some real good thing to be able to start to see these things, but the pattern isn't in the mental realm. The pattern is going to be in the emotional realm. So you have to use the stories to drop in underneath them, to feel what's underneath them. All right. So that's another skill that you're going to want to have. All right. And then the last thing I'm going to teach you for today is really, this is the skill. I'm going to call it responsibility. And this is the ability, this is when mentally you take responsibility. And this is not the same thing as fault for whatever it is, but it's about a power move. So you mentally take back all of the power that's yours and you respond to the situation accordingly. Now, this is a tough one because for many of us, being in a victim state or putting our blame outwards is easier than looking in the mirror, looking at our own stuff. But when we have the mental ability to look at what role did I play in this situation? How did I create this situation? How am I, perpetuating this situation? How am I doing these things? We have all of our power back. So it's really a power move to take responsibility for something. And I'm going to just reiterate, that's not necessarily fault. It's not like I've done something wrong, but it's like I'm cleaning this up, and I'm having the power to clean this up. And this is a really big mental shift, because a lot of times it's painful for the mind to see that it was wrong. It's painful for the mind to see that it did create some of your don't like situations. You were a contributing factor in whatever dumpster fire situation might, and even the most successful of us have an occasional life dumpster fire. So don't take it, I'm not calling you a dumpster fire. I'm just saying life is boring if you never have a dumpster fire. Right? But when you have a dumpster fire, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I see the way that I put all the cardboard in that dumpster. Oh, and I do see the way that I got the gasoline. Oh, and I do see the can of the matches that I got, I got a can full of gas and a handful of matches. Fuck around and find out, right? Those aren't even the right lyrics, but you want to feel into that. And that responsibility of you seeing your own situation and you taking your power back is a really big, that's another thing that's an energetic technique, because when you see it with your mind, and then you have that that mental faculty over the situation, you end up with more energetic power. So that's another place. It just sucks because a lot of times when we're taking responsibility, we have to be wrong, and we have to see where we caused something, or we played into it, or whatever else. So, but that's another money mindset skill. And it's not just a money mindset skill. It's just a mindset skill. It's a growth and an evolution skill. It's just taking responsibility for your life, for your don't like situations. And dude, I will tell you, this is so especially hard in relationships, because we want other people to do it. We want other people to change. It doesn't work. It's ineffective, but whatever. So, all right. So we have, this is the end of our episode today. So we have some other mindset skills that you want to be having. So again, please follow me on the socials. Take a look. We have a few offers coming up all on mindset. Honestly, I have a 28-day mindset offer that I have not even named yet. That's coming out, and that will be out toward the end of January. And that's going to be a WhatsApp group where we work on very small mindset shifts. Not they're going to be big shifts, but it's small amounts of work. They're micro practices. So we're going to do that every day for 28 days. And then coming up in February, we have a master class, The Astonishing Power of Directional Focus, which is a skill that you want to have. You want to take this master class. It is something that will help you every single day of your life. Clients that have done this work with me are like, this is one of the most important things that I've ever learned. And so it's just going to be a short 1-hour masterclass. I'm just going to teach that one skill. And then upcoming after that, we have Wired for Wealth, which is going to be a longer term program. I'm going to teach, honestly, a lot of the skills that I've put into these last 2 episodes, but in depth with processes, really, really on how to shift your mind, on how to be mentally able to grow and expand, on how to create the life that you want, and just like all of these mental faculties. So those 3 things are upcoming. So check the show notes for all of the links. Follow me on the socials, and we will go from there. All right, dear friends, I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I will talk to you next week.